Hello and welcome to another episode of Bored at the Right Time. It's in this very special last episode of the year, I'm going to discuss a film I've just seen. So I just finished watching Aaron Sorkin's new film, Being the Ricardos. I am a huge I Love Lucy fan, not just for the comedy, but the technical innovations that kind of brought the industry to life, if you will. We owe a lot of the technical innovations that they created in the 50s to what we use today. One of them is the multi-camera film format, because originally they used to use kinescopes. What they would do is they would send out the show live via satellite, and they would film a screen of the program. And then they would have the film developed, and then they would play it 3 hours later for the West Coast. So one of the stipulations in the contract was that it wasn't going to be kinescope, it was going to be on film, so that each time zone would get the same quality. And even though Desi Arnaz is credited as, being the father of that, a lot of people worked on it, and I think another show did it before, but Desi Arnaz perfected it. I watched the film, and I know a lot about I Love Lucy. I've read numerous books and things like that. So, I mean, we're going to be discussing sort of what they got right, what they got wrong, and everything like that. So, first off, this is not a review of the film. I thought the film was fantastic. I didn't think I was going to like it. Going in, I was like, there's no way. But to be honest with you, Nicole Kidman did a phenomenal job of getting Lucy down. Lucy was a very difficult yet funny comedian. Okay? So in the film, spoiler alert, when you watch it, you'll see that Lucy constantly interrupts rehearsal. I don't know if it's to the extent that they showed it, but I know that with physical comedy, everything had to be scripted. She would work with the props all week to make it look like it was natural. She would, pick up the lighter, with the lighter, practice with the lighter, the telephone. She'd have to know where the telephone was, what number she's calling. She also had the knack of kind of directing the show, even though they hired a director. The first thing that I'd like to mention is kind of how they condensed 3 major plot lines into 1 week. Now, granted, these things happened in separate seasons. So the main storyline is kind of a week in the life of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And it just so happens to be the week that they're trying to film the episode when Lucy kind of gets accused of being a communist. And that was a big deal back then. In 52 and 3, they were blacklisting people. People's careers were ruined. It's almost like cancel culture today. Kind of funny how history repeats itself. Originally, to appease her grandfather, who was a socialist, she, signed up to be a registered communist in the Communist Party. And like she says, back then, being a communist was almost as bad as being a Republican. Something to that effect. Don't nail me on that quote. In the film, it's kind of shown that Lucy and Desi are having an intimate moment when Walter Winchell, who was probably the one of the major news columnists.
This is Walter Winchell leaving you with a definition of a peaceful communist. His name is Joe Stalin. Good night.
He had a radio show, and he ended with a quick news piece about the country's top comedian and her affiliation with the Communist Party. In the film, Desi is with her, but in reality, he was playing cards at a director friend's house, and their press agent called Desi and interrupted the game and told him what happened, and he rushed home to the ranch. There's accounts saying that he drove anywhere between 125 and 135 miles an hour to get home. It was that bad. And an interesting fact is that in the mid-40s, Lucille Ball got fired from RKO. They let her go before she went to MGM. So in the film, you actually see that. But what they don't touch on, at least I don't think they do, Lucy and Desi buy the studio and turn it into Desilu. So it's kind of apropos that she now owns the studio that fired her. So anyway, this book is great because it sort of talks about the onstage and offstage antics, kind of describing the business acumen that Desi Arnaz had. He really always pretty much got what he wanted, anything he set his mind to. One thing I'd like to clear up here, like I understand that it needed to be dramatic and funny, whatever, but I had a problem with the Bob Carroll Jr. and Madeline Pugh relationship in the film. From my understanding and reading Madeline's book, they had a beautiful relationship. In fact, it was like a marriage, except there was no physical, kind of end to it. In fact, in her autobiography, she credits Bob Carroll Jr., even though, he didn't really help write it. It's just that was the crediting. It's like Lennon McCartney, Carol Davis. Hindsight is 2020. So I mean, granted, she might not remember all the nasty bits that probably did happen, but Lucille Ball was a consummate perfectionist. She wanted everything to be perfect. So I believe that when she used to stop rehearsal and ask specific targeted questions to the director, that really happened. I have no, qualms about that. She was a tough cookie, but in that regard, that's what made the show so good. She drove the success of the show. Nicole Kidman nailed Lucy's voice, mannerisms, and I was blown away. Granted, it's not, I think Aaron Sorkin said that this is not a biopic, okay? Like, some things had to be changed, but for the most part, Lucille Ball is spot on. And Desi Arnaz kind of, Javier Bardem doesn't sound like Desi Arnaz, doesn't really look like Desi Arnaz, but the mannerisms and the physicality of it really is pretty close. Ethel and Fred were great. The only issue with Fred is that, they obviously had him in a padded fat suit, but his face was too thin to be Fred Mertz. The body didn't match the face. Tony Hale plays Jess Oppenheimer, who was the creator, producer, head writer of I Love Lucy. Without him, there wouldn't be I Love Lucy. The kind of major things that happen in the film happen over 3 seasons, and it's condensed into one chaotic week. So the first thing is that the show that they're filming that week is not the show that they filmed that week of the Red Scare. They filmed The Girls Go Into Business, where they buy the dress shop. But in the film, they do Fred and Ethel Fight, and that's a season 1 episode directed by Mark Daniels. He was the director on the first season. And then season 2, Bill Asher came on and directed all the way to season 6. So I'm not really sure what the reason behind not having the real director, like making up a director, that threw me off. And then I'm like, I wonder what else. And then I realized, just because of my knowledge, I was like, this doesn't look right, this doesn't look right, etc., etc. I mean, it makes for great drama, but it kind of throws the hardcore fans off. The other major issue is the pregnancy shows. The pregnancy shows took place during season 2, and pretty much what Aaron Sorkin wrote about in that film, Desi Arnaz did. He had, a priest, a rabbi, and a minister read each script. They couldn't use the word pregnant. They couldn't have them in the same bed, although they do push the beds together. The beds are pushed together, but it's not a single bed. So here's another thing. I think it was in this book. Desi Arnaz knew about kind of what was happening with the communist story. He was at the track with J. Edgar Hoover. He tells Lucy that, I knew about this. I heard about it at the track from J. Edgar Hoover. And he said there's nothing that J. Edgar Hoover could do about it. So anyway, in the film, spoiler alert, he makes a phone call, and the person on the phone clears Lucille Ball of any communist affiliation or anything like that. And at the end, he's like, could you tell us who you are? He says, J. Edgar Hoover. So I think what they should have done was kind of threw in the real speech Desi gave and then threw in the phone call just to make it dramatic, you know? Another thing I'd like to point out is that when they created the, film technique, they had to come up with a way to get flat lighting so that everything was lit evenly. They couldn't put, a light on the ground because the cameras had to be able to move and actors had to be able to walk because they filmed it like a stage play from start to finish. If you look at when they kind of show the black and white areas, it's very dramatic. It's got fast fall off, it's got keys, and it just doesn't look like an episode of I Love Lucy because, again, I Love Lucy is all flat lighting, which means there's no kind of shadows, like basically this kind of lighting. It's lit from above, which isn't ideal, but hey. In fact, they got Carl Freund. Carl Freund worked with Fritz Lang in the 30s and 20s in Germany. And then he came over to America and he became a very successful cinematographer. And Desi kind of coaxed him into working on this project of how do we light from above, make it flat so that the film cameras can move in and out. So anyway, if you look at an episode of I Love Lucy and then you look at the actual recreations of the show, the lighting is different, probably again for dramatic purposes. The good news is that, Aaron Sorkin does explain pretty much everything that the casual viewer or the person that doesn't know about it needs to know. I feel like if you watch the film, you don't need to have a encyclopedic knowledge of Lucille Ball or I Love Lucy or Jess Oppenheimer or Madeline Davis like I do. Sorry. So even though I said this is not a review, I would highly recommend this film. It's long too. I would probably cut 10 to 15 minutes off of it. I feel like some parts don't even need to be there and it's just a little slow moving. I would pick up the pace a little bit. But again, Nicole Kidman is amazing and the film looks amazing too. I was very happy with kind of the aesthetic that they were going for. Everything, since it was a period piece, that's kind of hard to do right. And they kind of got the clothing, the colors, all that kind of drab 50s stuff. They got that right. So again, thank you for watching. I would love it if you subscribed and commented. I do like reading the comments. And I hope everyone has a healthy 2022. I'll see you next year.